Hey, y'all, welcome to the Playmakers Corner podcast. I'm your host for this episode, Kodey Stoffer, and I will be for quite a few episodes here in a row as we are kicking off our season previews here in July. I'm going to be going 5A through 1A basically in the order that I'm releasing it, with a bit of 4A sprinkled in, and some episodes that have multiple from each classification kind of mixed in there. And, Coach V is going to do much of the same, as well as Gideon as well, who has taken a handful of the teams that I had last year so that, he can get some experience with the previews, as well as, I will be out of the country starting on July 20th. So you will not be able to reach me, but you will be able to reach me and form me in on anything here, and obviously give your feedback on these episodes that are coming out now. In this first episode, I'm very excited to talk about a handful of 5A teams on this one that include Boulder, Westminster, Northglenn, Mountain Range, and then the Centennial League at the tail end of this episode. For those who don't know, that's Smoky Hill, Grandview, Eaglecrest, Cherokee Trail, my alma mater is the word I'm looking for, Arapahoe Highschool, as well as the 5A defending back-to-back-to-back state champs, Cherry Creek. So in the season previews, for those who didn't listen to them last year and who are joining us on this journey, first off, welcome. And just know that we kind of talk about like the last year's recap. And following that, we talk about some seniors that graduated, maybe some impact players, and then maybe some returning playmakers that are coming back into the fold, or maybe any offseason moves or changes that we were alerted of. And then we kind of do a WOW, which is an acronym for Window of Wins, where we project how many wins they will have. We take a look at their schedule. Most schedules will be basically the same as last year, with home and away games flipped, but they will be viewable games, and ones that we try and take a stab at. And we did a pretty good job last year at projecting who would win what games, and we'll be able to discuss some of that on here. But, that's kind of the rundown of how our season previews go. Obviously, be sure to follow us on TikTok, where we give brief synopsises as well as highlights from that team's season, and, just kind of give them a little bit of that spotlight there as well. But now that I have you on the edge of your seat here, let's go ahead and talk about this first team on the docket, just because this team was a little bit hard to research. So I want to just try and get this up front and going here, because this is a struggle that we will run into at times, where if teams don't have a lot of stuff posted on Max Preps, I can't find your all conference teams if you weren't on all state teams. And, obviously we don't watch every single game of every single season, because it's literally 3/4 of us by now. And so, we try and find what information we can, as well as, any film and whatnot. And, it's hard to know who to look at if you don't have numbers. So, I think that this is already better than last season, I would say, as far as doing my research and who has their numbers in and who's been inputting stats and whatnot. But, we still encourage teams to definitely have someone designated to input proper stats, regardless of how well or how bad your season went, just so, we can still get these players' names out there, and we can still kind of discuss, who we're talking about in the season previews here. So that's just kind of my little soapbox. But now that we really are 4 minutes in, let's go ahead and talk about this very first high school here, the Boulder High School Panthers here. This team is one that struggled a little bit here in this recap. I did project them to win more wins than they ended up doing. And, they had their struggles here, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Boulder here, they went 1-9 last season. I projected them to be within, I want to say, 3 to 6 in their window of wins. So I would say that they underachieved. And, it started with a win over Centaurus, 16-10 W, before dropping the next 9. Part of it was, how good some of these teams were. Our Arvada West is a solid team. But then you lose to a 4A Silver Creek and I believe a 4A Monarch 44-0, which is just rough. And then probably their best chance for a win down the stretch was against this Mountain Range team that I'll talk about here in a little bit. before going 0-5 in league and allowing over 30 points per game and not being able to score over 10 points outside of their one win against Centaurus. So, the defense was on the field quite a bit. There's a lot of inexperience in the backfield as well as under center that I think kind of plagued this team last year. And, they had a new coach, another one, and, they'll have another new coach this year as well. So he'll be looking to try and right the ship and get a little bit more out of this program. But let's go ahead and talk about some of the seniors that graduated here. I just kind of have, what has been made by the Boulder Booster Club or the Panther Club, whether that's on YouTube or Facebook, to kind of go off of here. So, Malachi Tarico was a graduate. Eric Martinez, who I believe was the lead tailback, or at least one of the guys who got carries. Charlie Getz was a captain, and he was a skill position player, so he'll be graduating, as well as Tate Franz, Jaden Seligman. Then you also have another senior here who's actually signed to play on the next level here. And, that's going to be Daniel Gerlach. He's a punter, kicker, and, he's going to play some college football at Colby College out there in Maine. So, that's exciting for him as well. So, one of the few guys who we at least have confirmation on going on and playing some college ball. Then we got Mac Keegan here, Dakota Hess-Talene here as well. Garrett Summers being a lineman, at least listed on this initial roster here. Then we have a Luke Robbins. He's a senior wide receiver here. I'm going to save Ethan for last because he's one of the best players on this team and somebody that I talked about in last season's kind of preview. Johan Martinez Hernandez is a skill position guy who has graduated this year as well. So a lot of skill position guys, but also some linemen. I think of the senior who was listed. I believe it's Alexander Jaquez, maybe. But, he had a little spotlight, and I think they did a good job spotlighting the seniors, as far as, who there is, and, doing a little profile on their Facebook page. So I thought that was interesting. And, obviously they had just some inexperience and a lot of first-year starters on this team, especially on the offensive side of the ball that just kind of plagued them. But I would say that maybe the most notable dude on this squad was Ethan Kunkel here. He did end up committing to play for St. John's University. That is a D3 program up in New York. But I do think that he has the most upside with just his athleticism and understanding of the game as far as what he has heading into, his college career. And all of that being said, like I said, the stats were really hard to come by on this squad. And, they just didn't input a lot of their stats is what it came down to. So I'm kind of going in blind here. And they didn't have a lot of all-league guys. They didn't have a lot of all-state guys, if any. So, there's definitely a lot of, names to be learned this year under the new direction of head coach Jesse Jones, who, comes in and has been building a lot of buzz in this community, I would say. And, is one of the things to maybe be a little bit excited for with, this football team. And, one that did not experience a lot of success this last season. And, in a spotlight with Boco Preps, shout out to them for, doing this kind of spotlight here. Jesse, he has coached at Adams City. He's a former indoor professional football player in, arena leagues and the American Professional Football League as well. So, he coached at Commerce City for a few years. And, he's had opportunities to face the Panthers and, respects it and also kind of wants to bring similar energy, at least to Boulder, now that Coach Prime is there and, really maximize the Boulder Panthers as a football team and what he wants to be a football town. As far as guys who scored points last year, Walker Hungate is going to be an incoming senior who looked like he notched a couple of touchdowns here. You also have Waylon Lowry as well as a Landon Covell who appeared to register tackles last year. Like I said, not a ton of statistics here. And Walker, also somebody who notched interceptions along with Lowry's one interception as well. And then on the offensive side of the ball, it's kind of hard to tell. The only underclassman who attempted passes last year was Henry Sharp, but, that was to a varying degree of success with 0 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. And, I think that this team's going to end up having to lean on just a few athletes for this season more than, they'd maybe like to for the next season. So looking ahead to their 2023 fall schedule here, the order is going to be changed up a little bit. They open up the season against Monarch High School instead of Centaurus, but they will play Centaurus in Lafayette after that. And then after that, they got Arvada West, Silver Creek, Mountain Range, Fossil Ridge on the road, Fairview. I love that it says away because they play in the same stadium. And then Pooter, Rocky Mountain at home, and Fort Collins on the road. Now, it's one of those things with a new coach and a team that doesn't have a lot of stats and then has a handful of impact players that we did know of graduating and kind of some unproven guys as well. And, a poor record from the prior year. It's going to be one of those things where it's going to have to be a you show me situation. So Boulder here, I have their window of wins between 0 and 3. I think that maybe they could beat Centaurus again. Monarch is a team that I think is going to be very solid again. Arvada West, they're going to be a lot younger, but they also just have a really good talent pool there and very good coaching. Mountain Range is probably a winnable game here, but the rest of their league looks strong as well as last year, maybe building off of some success last year or just continuing to be successful in a lot of things. Silver Creek is a 4A squad, so we will see kind of where they're at. But that is my season preview for the Boulder Panthers. The next team that I'm going to talk about here is, we're going to kind of work our way, or at least for the most part, work our way from north to south, more or less. So the next 3 teams, are going to be Mountain Range, Northglenn, and Westminster. They are all in the same league. And, they're all teams that kind of had their struggles last year. So I'm excited to talk about them and, maybe get a little bit excited and generate some buzz. So, let's go ahead and talk about Mountain Range football here. And, just kind of talking about last season, they kind of stumbled out of the gate, losing 2 close-ish ones to Greeley West and Centaurus before a forfeit sparked a 2-game, or I guess if you include the forfeit, 3-game win streak against Grand Junction and Boulder. But once they got into league, they were pretty outclassed by everyone, withholding Westminster, which was only a 1-score game here. So talking about graduating seniors, there were 3 different quarterbacks getting starts last year, and 2 of them were seniors in Isaac Gomez and Mason Tafoya. But, their QBR was pretty low, so they are looking for their playmaker under center still. But, their tailback, Dylan Sherman, that's going to be a big loss here since he had a 1,000-yard season, 10 rushing touchdowns, and he had the largest scrimmage yards by a really significant margin, running for more than the 3 quarterbacks combined to pass for. And, at the same time, he was also the leader in receptions, and he was second in total yards and 4th in tackles and had an interception on defense. So, he was the do-it-all stud on this squad. And, he graduated this past spring in 2023 here. So, and then senior receiver Andino Disqua graduates after being the leading receiver in yards. So when Sherman was leading in receptions, and then Andino was leading in yards. And then in the secondary, the likes of Jeremiah Cortez and Julian Morrow both graduate with 3 interceptions apiece. And almost every other person who notched an interception graduates, like Andino, like Sherman, and Joshua Dutra, who also led the team in pass deflections with 9, making for 10 interceptions and 24 pass deflections walking across the stage. And, while the leading tackler will return, 6 of the other top 7 tacklers will not be returning, and that makes for a cumulative loss of 230 plus tackles to graduation. But, we've been a little bit of a Debbie Downer here. Let's go ahead and pick it up and talk about some of the guys who are going to be coming back and try and create some buzz here. So, while they did lose a lot of guys, I wouldn't say any of them were really wow contributors. And they got to be pumped that Connor Clark is returning. He recorded 50 solo tackles himself and led the team in total tackles by more than double digits. And, is going to probably be that guy that they lean on to get this defense set and ready to go. And then the leader in tackles for loss for the defense also comes back with Trey Parker on the defensive line, who, is a little bit on the smaller size, but, he was getting into the backfield as a junior, so his senior year should yield some good results. And then Devin Meisner, who tied for the team lead in sacks with 3 in just 6 games, could benefit from some health and see his production take an uptick. And then Taryn McNair, he was respectable with an interception and 4 pass deflections on this defense. So the defense is returning a lot, which is good because, unfortunately, there doesn't seem a whole lot to talk about on offense. But maybe something interesting is that as a sophomore, Bryce Stillings got the occasional nod and, passed the ball 29 times and led the team in completion percentage with a smaller sample size and was the only quarterback on the squad to record a positive touchdown to interception ratio. The only red flag here is that the only game where he had more than 10 attempts did not go so well. But with so many graduates at skill positions, you might just have to hand him the keys and hope for the best so that senior year you might make a push. So he's entering his junior season here. My guess at quarterback, Bryce Stillings. And, I think that this schedule for Mountain View, will give them chances, but it giveth and it taketh a little bit here. So they open up the season once again against Greeley West on the road in Greeley. That's going to be tough. Greeley West, I do know, is returning a handful of solid players, players that I coached when they were freshmen and, are now entering their junior and senior seasons with, some juice. They are losing some studs as well. But, that game I'm going to say is kind of a toss-up, so we'll kind of just see how it goes. But I'm leaning Greeley West. Centaurus, one's going to toss up, but I might even be leaning Centaurus here. Then after that, Mullen is one of their non-league games. I don't think that they win this game. And then Grand Junction and Boulder, kind of toss-ups as well, but I'll give Mountain Range the edge in those games before, a Doherty squad that did graduate some talent, but they still do have some very talented skill position players. Westminster is a team that, they're returning solid numbers, but they're still a bit on the younger side here. So, but I do think that Westminster probably beats them again this year before they wrap up the season against Northglenn, Overland, and Denver East. A lot of those teams, I think, just have a more solid or consistent talent pool to kind of pull from there. So, let's say worst case scenario, you only beat a Greeley West or a one of the two, and then you beat Grand Junction and Boulder. I still think, and maybe you get the door slammed on you in league. That's about 3 wins, I want to say. And then best case scenario, they steal one against like a Westminster or a Northglenn, or they win against West and Centaurus to start the season. I say that you probably have a window of wins of around 3 to 5 for this Mountain Range squad here up in Westminster. And, they'd love to get that win back in that crosstown rivalry, so I think that's something that'll be fueling them a little bit. But, there's still a lot of questions here at skill positions to try and project something to go that well. So that does it for Mountain Range. So let's go ahead and talk about another team in their league, and that's going to be the Northglenn Norsemen. So for Northglenn, they got off to a really nice 3-0 start. That was with a forfeit win over Gateway and very solid wins over Adams City and Thornton. But, they were brought back down to earth with Stanley Lake really put into them, rushing all over them. And then a close loss to Prairie View was the beginning of a bad streak here as they got absolutely drubbed by Denver East and Overland in league play. They then bounced back to go 2-1 down the month of October here with wins against Mountain Range and Westminster, and then a 40-plus point loss to Doherty. So when they won, they won respectively and, kind of put things away. And when they lost kind of hard. So, I think that's kind of the Norseman rundown here for Northglenn. And, it's unique that they had so many contributors on the offensive side of the ball, but there's one senior that does stand out who is graduating, and that's Brian Dykstra here, who was not only solid on defense with an interception and 46 tackles, but he led the team in total yards, receptions, and tied for receiving touchdowns while logging another 3 scores on the ground. But just overall was a very nice utility player. And speaking of, receptions and receivers, the top 5 receivers, including Brian, all graduate. And while none of them were, I'd say, necessarily dominant, it's just a ton of yards walking across the stage here. And then, in the backfield, Zach Martinez did run for 500 yards and was the leader in carries and kept it consistent on the ground. He'll be graduating. And then there's some studs on the defensive side of the ball here who are graduating in Brock Butcher and Manuel Pacheco Jr., who both had 5 sacks apiece and were beasts for this defense with over 150 combined tackles and 16 total tackles for loss, with the ability to not only get to the quarterback, but also, get those hurries as well and force some bad decisions. And another guy on the defensive line who was a stud was Giovanni Cardona, who had 59 tackles and 6 of those being for loss. So lots of losses up front for the defensive line. And then at the wide receiver position, looking a little bit bare here. But, there's some young players here who are very intriguing to keep an eye out for. But, we'll start with the rising senior Elvio Agaga here, who had, a smooth 53 tackles and 5 tackles for loss this season, where he was 5th on the team in total tackles. And then we have Demetrius Perea here, who had an interception and 2 fumble recoveries, along with 48 tackles and 3 tackles for loss here, where he ended up in the backfield. So just a nice overall heads up, head on a swivel player here in Perea. And then, we have some sophomores here, like Anthony Martinez, who had 47 tackles and 4 for loss. And, is going to have to be that guy on the defensive line who takes a big step this next season and performs for the Norsemen. And, as far as, quarterback goes, they will be returning, their starting quarterback from last year who's entering his senior year. That's Trevor Dean. He threw for over 1,300 yards and whatnot, and ran for another 245. So overall, 17 total touchdowns, 11 through the air and 6 on the ground. But he is very turnover prone. He did throw 14 interceptions last year, and that was with a consistent kind of squad. So, it makes me wonder if what's that's going to kind of look like with a bunch of skill position guys that he hasn't thrown to before in his senior year, should he be given the job anyway. So let's go ahead and take a look at this, upcoming season schedule for the Norsemen here and just kind of see where they're at. So once again, opening up against Adams City, that should be a win. That's on the road, but I still think it should be a win. Then they play at home against Gateway and Thornton. And, I think that they could get off to another 3-0 start here this year before playing against Stanley Lake. Now, Stanley Lake had a pretty substantial amount of graduates here. And, I'm not sure if they're going to be able to sustain their success that they did last year. So this is a winnable game. But, I think that that's more of a window of win kind of game here. Prairie View, they had a handful of young players last year, but they also had a handful of rising seniors as well. So, this game was only a 1-score game last season, and I could see much of the same this year. Now, Denver East, Overland. Once again, I think that these talent pools just kind of override Northglenn's ability here. And I think that especially at skill positions, you're going to see a gap here in experience between, the East Angels and the Overland Trailblazers here, compared to Northglenn, that is. But, they might be able to get a push up front, which is good. Mountain Range, I still think that Northglenn probably wins this game, honestly. And then Doherty and Westminster, I think that, Northglenn might be in for a pretty solid season here. I think on the low end of things, they definitely at least win 4 games. But, on the high end of things, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Maybe they go 6. So I'm going to give them a window of wins of 4 to 6. I'm pretty sure that's what I had for them last year, and they probably end up going 5-5 or 6-4 here. So that's going to be my projection for the Northglenn Norsemen. To wrap up this league, or at least the teams that I have from 5A League 7, we're going to unfortunately have to bring up last year's recap of Westminster, which is definitely not the season the Wolves were aspiring for, as they allowed a pretty zany 50 points per game this season, and in what was probably one of the worst disasters in school history, with 3 of their opponents scoring over 60 points. And I have no idea how they got that win over Mountain Range. That had to be like rivalry fuel, because I don't even know if this team was really better than Mountain Range last season. But, the record doesn't show so, at least. But, yeah, let's go ahead and talk about it here. Look, Far Northeast, that's a good team with great athletes. They had a dominant player in, I want to say, Draymond Jackson, maybe. Then they lose to a Rangeview squad, a Stanley Lake squad that was really good last year. They allow Prairie View to score 63 points. No disrespect to Prairie View, but oh my gosh. And this is the first of 2 63-point games that they're scored on, because then they play a team from Wichita, Kansas, which kudos to them for getting out there and playing, an out-of-state team. And then, they start to just look a little bit more coherent in the next 2 games, losing to Overland by only 2 points, and then they beat Mountain Range by 7 before, a very good Doherty, or a playoff team at least in Doherty, comes through and beats them, and then they get drubbed again by Denver East and Northglenn to end their season. So, let's talk about some of the seniors that graduated here. This team was incredibly young last year, but 2 senior running backs ran for over 500 yards combined and 2 scores in the pair of Will Miley and Quentin Watson. And then the 2 leading tacklers of Xavier Picasso and Kiko Rosales, 73 and 65 tackles respectively, both graduate, with Kiko Rosales notching another 7 tackles for loss, which was tied for the team lead. And Xavier Picasso had an interception himself. The other person who got 7 tackles for loss was Andrew Garcia, who's also graduating this year. And, Will Miley on the defensive side of the ball, not only running the ball well, but he had 3 tackles for loss. And, the top 5 tackles for loss leader are all graduating between Miley, Garcia, Rosales, and then Leo Lujan and Ethan Candelaria, who had 7 tackles for loss combined, and, 460 pounds up front that they'll be losing. So a lot of the guys that were able to get into the backfield, who were able to do something on defense at times last year, are all graduating. But, the secondary is going to look very similar to last year. 9 out of the 12 pass deflections returned to the secondary, headlined by incoming seniors Hunter M. Garton and Elias Garcia, who both had a pair of interceptions as well. So the secondary should be a little bit more improved last year. And on top of that, M. Garton was the leading tackler on the squad with 47 tackles last season. And, 5 other underclassmen were in the top 12 of tackles. And, that should hopefully keep a lot of what was good and improve off of that for this upcoming year. Hunter, on the offensive side of the ball, was also the leading receiver with just a hair under 600 yards and 3 receiving touchdowns. And then with another 700 yards of return yards, Hunter almost reached 1,400 yards from scrimmage. So they're probably getting their absolute best player back from last year in Hunter M. Garton heading into his senior season. And then Colby Saiz, his 3 sacks were the highest by an individual on the team. And then, he also had 34 tackles and 3 tackles for loss as well. So, once again, one of those guys who was in the top 12, who was an underclassman, or at least, not a senior, will be coming back. And then Mason Kuwait was the guy for this offense under center, throwing for 1,500 yards and throwing or rushing for a combined 24 touchdowns. But it was not all sunshine and rainbows, as he did throw 13 interceptions. But I think part of that is just how quickly opposing offenses were scoring and kind of putting this Wolves offense into, kind of a score immediately kind of situation with a lot of these scores. So, hopefully the defense can take a step up. The backfield could take a step forward as well. That's going to be necessary because the rushing attack just was not very efficient last year. And obviously that includes the offensive line that's going to have to improve as well here. But, he is, like I said, going to be getting Will back, as well as Elias Garcia, who is the leading touchdown catcher with 5 and just, received over 450 yards in only 7 games. So their passing attack should look a little bit better this year with some consistency over the past 2 years. But their defense is still an absolute problem. They hopefully have a new defensive coordinator to try and figure it out. But, looking ahead to their fall 2023 schedule here, obviously it's going to look similar in a lot of ways here. They're going to still open up the season against far Northeast Warriors here in Denver. But this time it'll be on the road, as will Rangeview and Stanley Lake. So they have 3 road games to start. Far Northeast does graduate some guys, but they had some underclassmen contributions as well. And then, Rangeview, I think that this might be a winnable game, honestly, for Westminster, but to be determined. Stanley Lake, like I said in a prior segment, they're just not as good as last year. So, a little bit of a toss-up there. They then have Overland at home, play Mountain Range on the road, Doherty on the road, all the way down in the Springs. So that's a little bit of a drive there. And then close the season against Denver East and Northglenn at home. Honestly, this team, I think, has very important pieces coming back. And so they should be hopefully a little bit more competitive than last year. But I still think at best this team maybe wins 3 games. So I'm going to give them a window of wins of 1, 2, 3 here for this season. The offensive line is just going to have to show me a lot more. This offense has to be balanced. And, the defense has to. There's no reason for me to believe in this defense as of right now. So that's something that has to be earned. So, I say that maybe they go 2-8 this season or 3-7 more than likely. But, they could have a repeat of last season. It'd be really cool if they won 4 games, but I think 2-8 or 3-7 are kind of what we're looking at for the Wolves as a whole. So, yeah, that does it for, the teams that I have from that league. I think that Simon also has somebody in that mix there as well. But, let's go ahead and talk about the Centennial League, the most exciting league in 5A, in my opinion. I think that obviously they produce, the majority of the teams in this league make the playoffs almost every year. And, last year was much the same, where 5 out of the 6 did make the postseason. So let's go and talk about it, including starting off, I should say, with my alma mater, the Arapahoe Warriors. And so last year, that was the first season with Coach Tyler Brayton, my apologies, in the headset. And it can be argued that it was a major success, having lost lots of firepower on the defensive side of the ball. Younger players stepped up and were making plays, and there are a handful of seniors who elevated their game, and you could argue that they were competitive in games they were supposed to be, and even performed great in league with an upset win over Grandview. Their season ended on a freezing night against Thunder Ridge on the heels of a sensational performance where Arapahoe dared the Grizzlies to beat them with their freshman QB, and hats off to Thunder Ridge and DJ Bordeaux and that Grizzlies team that obviously did exactly that. But I think that 6-4, there's a lot to be happy about with a pretty relatively young team here. But let's go ahead and talk about some of the seniors who did graduate, who won't be helping the Warriors and won't be in the fold this year. So, on offense, they are fortunate to be returning a handful of players since last year they were really junior heavy and didn't produce a ton of points. But, the main catalyst to this offense was Alonzo Ramirez, who, graduated after having 126 carries last season and just over 800 scrimmage yards. And then, on the receiving end of things, Jackson Schmeling was second on the team in receptions with 33, which was 15 more catches than the number 3 receiver and was just shy of 400 yards. So, those are 2 guys on the offensive side of the ball that we won't be seeing, as well as, this guy who went both ways, the 6'5", 270-pound first team All-State PMC senior top 5 tackle, not offensive tackle, but Matthew Green, who's taken his talents to UNLV after putting in fantastic work on both sides of the ball this past season and, being one of our top 5 interior defensive linemen in the senior class. His intensity and strength will be an edge that the Warriors will need to replace on both sides of the ball, with his 5 tackles for loss on the defensive side of the ball, and then just being a huge anchor for the offensive line as well. They also lose first-team All-State specialist Jackson Smith, who scored 52 points and consistently pinned teams inside of their own 20 a handful of times, which could be a large impact for a team that wasn't explosive on offense. So, the offense is going to have to step up and probably can't rely on a specialist to do a lot of the same things. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, more specifically, Michael Autry was second on the team in tackles with 105 and the leader in tackles for loss with 7 tackles for loss. And then also from his backer position, he was somebody who could really pack a punch, knew how to spotlight the ball, and he forced 3 fumbles, which is pretty substantial in, a sport, or at least in a situation in this high school football where, fumbles, they're either really easy to come by or they're impossible to come by. So being able to force more than 1 fumble, I think that's when you start to see it as more of a skill thing, especially 2. And then once you get to 3, that's an established skill to me rather than luck. So, and then leading pass rusher Cade Huggins departs with Matthew Green, obviously, and Michael Autry. All 3 of those guys combined for 9 sacks and 23 hurries. So those will all be moving on. But Brayton, with his experience on the defensive line, obviously it hurts to lose talent, but, in a year where they had to replace Jared Ramos as well as Jackson from, them going to their schools of Montana and Air Force respectively, I think that they did a pretty good job, and we should expect a little bit of the same next year as well. Then defensive back Sam Ballas led the Warriors with 12 pass deflections and brought a couple down with him while forcing and recovering fumbles. So that's another defensive stud that they'll have to do without. But, while they're missing pieces from both sides of the ball, I think that they bring back their best 2-way player this year in the returning playmakers section here with Charlie Eckhart, who's been looked at and offered by a handful of teams in the Ivy League. His physicality makes him a problem on offense with fantastic jump ball skills, including a jump ball win that literally won them the game against Legacy to start their season last year. And then on the defensive side of the ball, absolute stud. Mainly what he's being recruited as is a safety, where he had 2 interceptions and another 11 pass deflections. And, I love to see an Arapahoe wide receiver doing big things. And, he's going to continue to be that threat on offense, but expect him to basically never leave the field when offense or defense is on this season. The Warriors probably will also benefit here from having some consistency under center, with Mikey Moynihan entering his senior year. And, in his first year as a full-time starter, he kind of struggled to establish rhythm and good decision-making, throwing 10 TDs to 10 interceptions. But, he kind of helped soften those mistakes by offering a, aspect of his game, running the football. He averaged 6.1 yards per carry, and he ran for 6 touchdowns. And, he'll still be an integral part of their run game with no clear-cut next guy up, rushing the football. So, he'll be leaned on to, like he did last year, run the football very well and efficiently, but probably at a higher volume, and then hopefully getting an opportunity to turn this into a little bit of an RPO action and getting to pass the ball a little bit more as well. Jumping over to the defensive side of the ball, Coach Brayton's, strength, I'd say, is, this defense will be the moneymaker for this team, as discussed with Charlie Eckhart, obviously on the defensive side of the ball. But they got a ton of playmakers returning, including 4 of their top 5 tacklers, with Joshua Acker, who also led the team, or was tied for the team lead with 2 interceptions, and recorded another 7 pass deflections and recovered a team high 2 fumbles. So a very heads-up player there. Then you got Wyatt Starbuck here, 51 tackles, 5 of those being for loss. Eckhart. And then the tackle leader, Will Knox, who notched 118 tackles and was the mind in the middle for this defense. He will be asked to do more without his running mate, Autry, obviously, but I believe he is more than capable of doing so and is on my watch list for linebackers this season. And then after making second team All Centennial League and catching our eye his freshman year, Ben Brown returns for his junior season and will probably be asked to play across the line and will be asked to take a step forward in Green's absence. So, last year I projected them to have a window of wins between 3 and 5. They went 6 and 4, so they obviously exceeded expectations by a little bit here. And so let's go ahead and take a look at their 2023 schedule now that the bar has been raised for them. But you do have to remember that the bar is raised for everyone else as well. So looking ahead to this 2023 schedule, I do think that some challenges from last year will continue to be challenging. And some things that were easy last year maybe will be a bit more challenging than they were in the 2022 season. I think that this legacy game, this is going to be in Broomfield instead this time, and this legacy squad is very, very good. This could go either way, but they could start off with a loss on the road this season. And then this year for the Milk Jug Trophy, they do face a Heritage team that is returning plenty of talent. I think that they're also getting an upgrade under center potentially as well with a very tall, mobile quarterback. So, they'll have some things to combat there. They did graduate their most productive guys on offense, but a lot of this defense for the Eagle squad is returning. And this is probably going to be one of the more competitive Milk Jug games in the past 5 years, probably, between a Heritage and Arapahoe as well. They then have, 2 more home games in what I assume is going to be the new LPS stadium against Regis and Columbine here, both on Friday nights. I think that Regis is a bit more winnable this year just with how many guys they did graduate, but they still have stellar playmakers, especially in that backfield, that they're going to have to key up on, and their offense is going to have to overcome this Raider defense, which is always a challenge. Same with Columbine. Rock Canyon did graduate a lot of people, and I think that this is probably a win here for Arapahoe as they've kind of gone back and forth over the past couple of years, and that will conclude their league play here. So I think, at worst, I think that they still win 2 of these games and maybe 3 of them, but we'll say that they're 2-3 heading into league play. Smoky Hill, they should be able to get a win there, at least get to 500, if not over 500 by this point in the season, before facing Grandview, Cherokee Trail, Cherry Creek, and Eaglecrest, all teams that are going to be substantially better than last year, but I don't think there's really anyone here that Arapahoe can't compete with, if I'm being honest with you. They obviously beat Grandview last year, but they lost to them the year before that with a chance to win leagues. So, a little bit of a back and forth there. I'm going to give the edge to Grandview just with the skill position diff and, the quarterback play a little bit until Mikey potentially shows me more this season. Cherokee Trail, they're going to be substantially more competitive this year, but I still think that they're more on the younger side here. So I'm going to give Arapahoe the win on that one. And then Cherry Creek and Eaglecrest, they probably split those games. So let's say worst case scenario, I still think that they probably win 3 games in league and then say that they win only 2 games non-league. I think that this team should at least win 5 games. This team should at least win 5 games here. So I'm going to go ahead and write that in chalk here. And then at best, maybe they beat a Grandview and go 4-1 in league, and maybe they beat a Regis or a Legacy. I don't think both. So I think that 5-7 is the window of wins, an expectation for my Warriors. At only a season after doubting them, I am going to place the bar a little bit higher and, expect them to compete with for a first round bye once again this season. And, maybe even be a little bit more settled, and hopefully Brayton sticks around. It's kind of a miracle that this team has remained so competitive despite all of the moving parts here. They obviously have to find that guy in the backfield to stabilize their offense, but this team has always been most successful when the defense is good, and I think that it will continue to be good this season. I will say that my projected record is probably 5-5, but, I'm open to being wrong. So at least in the name of my alma mater. So, I'm excited to check that out and, obviously, get a chance. I'm probably going to be at the Milk Jug game for this year. For the first time as media, I'd love to be at the Milk Jug game. So, my AHS guys, my guy Tyler Brayton there, whose name I literally can't say right because I'm recording this way too late at night. But yeah, let's go ahead and link up and take care of business against the Eagles, who I will be previewing and putting some more respect on their name as well on another episode. But continuing with business on this episode, I do want to talk about Cherokee Trail here, who, like I said, was very young last season. They had a very talented 2022 class that left, and they were pretty depleted, but they had some young guys step up and a friendly start of non-league play that they rode to a first-round playoff berth, where they just lost to a more experienced Rock Canyon team. Cherokee Trail will look to build off this past year with a season of experience and a ton of confidence to perform better and compete more in league, I believe. So, they go 4-6 overall. They start off their season with a win against Chatfield and then a close loss to Rocky Mountain before getting drubbed by Columbine, and then bouncing back with wins over Fort Collins and Castleview in pretty competitive games. And then, unfortunately, they only get a 5-point win over Smoky Hill in league. They push Arapahoe pretty close, losing by only 4 points in a very low-scoring game before losing to Rock Canyon by 3. So, and I think that Rock Canyon game is a great benchmark for the ceiling of this team, honestly, because I don't think that they really had any business being that competitive with Rock Canyon, who was very solid on both sides of the football and were very good at establishing their will. And they weren't quite able to do that to the same level with this Cherokee Trail team. So let's talk about some of the graduating seniors here. On the offensive side of the ball, they are going to be losing the leading receiver, Noah Greer, who graduates after a solid 53 reception, 682-yard, and 6 touchdown season, where he had twice as many receptions as the next receiver. And if you combine that with another 400 yards and of returning the football, this was the only 1,000-yard all-purpose contributor last season. So that will be a stellar athlete that they will have to replace here. Now, a lot of teams could live with 24 points per game allowed, and that was more than enough for Cherokee Trail. That was aided by a very senior-heavy defense. 7 of their 9 leading tacklers are graduating. That accounts for 695 tackles, 19 tackles for loss, and 9 interceptions. This includes their top 5 tacklers, Patrick Samate, who had 86 tackles, an interception, 2 sacks, Malik Jameson, who had 92 tackles, 2 for loss, an interception, and 10 pass deflections, along with a blocked field goal. And then linebacker Ellis Williams, who had 125 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, and a pick 6. And that's not even the most tackles on the team, as Caden Porter, who had 136 tackles. Combine all of this with top 5 senior safety Caleb Davis, who I think is at Chadron State, or actually Caden Porter was second on the team in tackles. Caleb led the team in tackles for losses, interceptions, and also had a pick 6. His athleticism and IQ is going to be deeply missed. He's somebody who, you could really trust to cover a lot of the field, cover a lot of ground for guys. And so, this defense that I thought performed pretty well in bunches last year, with their win over Chatfield, with their win over in their wins, and even in their loss against Arapahoe and Rock Canyon. I think that this defense performed very, very well. And for kind of a change of pace, the offense wasn't really the one pulling the weight. But, with so much of the back end of the defense graduating, we got to talk about some fellas up front who are returning, for the defense. Like all-league class of 25 lineman Cade Brook, that was the only sophomore with over 60 tackles and also notched 2 sacks and 5 hurries. He stands in at 6'3" and 215 pounds as a sophomore, and with some bulking this offseason, hopefully he can get up to 220, 225 and really cause some problems in the backfield. And then the leading sack guy was Raul Rodriguez, who's another class of 2025 guy to get excited about, who collected 4 sacks last season and had another 5 hurries and 39 tackles to go with that. Now, there is a mass exodus at the linebacker position, but Jaden Smith, will be the guy who's looked to do that in a junior season that saw him collect 56 tackles. So he'll be the senior guy at the backer position this year. Now, there could be no relation, but there's another Jameson on this squad who had 44 tackles last season, and his name is Marquise. With another 3 pass deflections, he's somebody to probably lean on, in secondary situations or in passing downs. Now, it's crazy that, I talked about some seniors, but also some sophomores that were high impact, because this class of 2025 Cougar squad here is very dangerous. And, Simon did a breakdown of this quarterback, Elliot Ming, who, in his freshman year threw 14 touchdowns to 8 interceptions and over 1,300 yards. I definitely would listen to Simon's breakdown once again on episode 224, but Elliot Ming gives this team a lot of promise here and a lot of hope in a season and in a system that, this Cherokee Trail system is very quarterback friendly, I would say. And, I think that this could be very exciting and promising for this squad for Elliot Ming to kind of take over the helm and turn up here. Now, catching passes from Ming were also sophomores, Summers and Mathenge, who had over 600 combined yards. And Peyton Summers actually had 5 receiving touchdowns, being the scoring threat here. Now, while not being high in volume of receptions or yards, Peyton Castro is one of only 3 players who caught touchdowns last season and is coming back. So, that is somebody to kind of mention here. And then in the backfield, Noah Collins was a workhorse with 186 carries for 727 yards and 4 scores. And, should he focus on his vision this offseason, and the line also kind of takes a step forward, I could easily see him be a 1,000-yard rusher. And, if he could also be a threat out of the backfield, this could be a very dynamic Cougar offense, one that we're used to seeing. Last year was a bit of an anomaly as, through 11 games, they were averaging basically 2 scores a game. When only a year prior to that, Logan Brook threw 30-plus touchdowns, and their quarterback the year before that, when we first covered, whose name is escaping my mind at this moment, he also was dealing as well, and somebody that we kind of looked at for a top 5 quarterback kind of list, or at least during the pandemic season and whatnot there. So those are the returning playmakers. This is going to be another offensive kind of renaissance for Cherokee Trail, in my opinion. But their defense taking as many hits as they did, along with other teams getting better, I think is going to pose some threats on this schedule. So I think that their opening home game against Chatfield, I think that this is probably a Chatfield win, having talked through them. Stay tuned for other 5A previews, obviously, that I'm going to be doing. But this Chatfield team is going to be really good this year. Now, on the road against Rocky Mountain, Rocky Mountain's graduating a lot of people. They should probably win that game this year. Columbine, I think that Columbine takes care of business against Cherokee Trail. And then Fort Collins, that one I could see being a toss-up, as well as Castleview. Castleview has some studs on defense coming back, so I'd keep an eye out for that. And then there might be, a sense of freedom with, maybe a better quarterback stepping up to the plate out there for the Sabercats or Wildcats, whatever. They don't invite us to things, so. But, following that, they will turn their attention to league here. So, in non-league games, I do think that 3-2 is a pretty reasonable request. But if they go less than 2-3, something went very wrong. Then in league play here, I do think that there is a chance for them to be a little bit more competitive against Eaglecrest this year. I don't think that they beat Cherry Creek. I don't think that they beat Arapahoe with the youth that they have going on, but they could push them as they've shown last year. So, I think that obviously at worst 1-4, but I think that they should probably go 2-3 in league, combined with 2-3 in their in the other aspect of their season. So I think that at the bare minimum, this team wins 4 games. And I say at the high end, if they pull off wins, like if they go 3-2 and then pull off an upset in league, they could win 6 games this season. Once again, I just think that they're a bit on the younger side, and I don't know what to think of this defense, but I do think that there's a lot to be excited for. And I think that Cherokee Trail, depending on what goes well this year and how they kind of build off of this class of 2025 and some guys who, are going to get even more snaps from the class of 2025, this might be a team to watch out for here next year, especially heading into the Centennial League and even beyond that. But this team should make the playoffs, and, we'll see if they can maybe even get a playoff win for these class of 2025 guys and get some experience as well in winning a playoff game. Up next here in the Centennial League, we have the Grandview Wolves here. And yeah, let's go ahead and talk about what happened last season. They had a very solid season, honestly, where they did test themselves after what feels like a warm up game over Overland. They did beat Fossil Ridge, who is a playoff team. They lost to Ralston Valley at home, who is a playoff team. They go to Fruita Monument, who, while is 4A, is a super far drive, and B, one of the better teams in 4A, a playoff team as well. Then they trounce Pomona before heading into league play, where they go 4-1, only losing to Arapahoe and beating Cherry Creek to end their season, heading into the playoffs with an 8-2 record. They have a first round bye where they await the winner of Mountain Vista versus Rocky Mountain. They end up beating Rocky Mountain 20-0, but in that game, Liam Zarka gets injured. I believe it was a hand injury. And so in the Pine Creek playoff game, they just fail to generate offense, and that's where their season ends, is against Pine Creek. So let's talk about some seniors who graduated. And I think that the obvious headline here is from the stalwart tackles of Zachary Henning, who's now going to Washington, and Wyatt Walters. You combine those with the gigantic Simon Kibbe graduation, and that takes away, for the most part, extreme size up front on the offensive side of the ball from the Wolves and their ability to run the ball, as well as obviously very solid skill if we're talking about a guy who went to Washington and other players who are also going to be college athletes as well playing football. So those will be very tough spots to replace on the offensive side of the ball. And then on the flip side, the interior defensive line loses some dogs as well, with All-State honorable mention Caleb Renner, who posted 50 tackles and 3 tackles for loss. He's graduating. Second team All-League Delano Jefferson, who had 43 tackles and 5 tackles for loss. And even leading pass rusher Brody Robinson, who had 4 sacks. They all graduate. And that doesn't even include Malumba Wakalanji, led in tackles for loss with 9 across that very disruptive front line for the Wolves. So the trenches on both sides are suffering here. And then to further talk about the defensive side of the ball, Max Kibbe graduates following a triple-digit tackling performance and being second on the squad with 8 tackles for loss, averaging 10 tackles per game. And, the secondary, they went through a lot more change last season, but, they do have to replace second-team All-League defensive back Gibby Leafgreen, who is third on the team with 88 tackles and also led the team in pass deflections with 10 while notching 2 interceptions. And him, along with 2 other interceptions of the team's 5, are graduating. So 4 out of 5 interceptions are walking across the stage. And then through the air, the 2 leading receivers in Simon Kibbe and Davion Henderson will be 1,000+ yards and 10 scores that will have to be filled primarily by last year's sophomores who were able to contribute a little bit here. And, at the tailback position, I believe it was Chase Tahir here, took more of a complimentary role, and he did a really good job with 5.9 yards per carry and 4 scores, and he is also graduating as well. So there's going to be more pressure on the current tailback to kind of pick that up. But, let's talk about the returning tailback as well as, other dogs that are returning here. So, yeah, the tailback who was an All-State honorable mention was Don Vernon. He was electric last year, and he has a very violent running style that promoted him into a workhorse back. 177 carries for 1,123 yards and 14 scores, putting him amongst the top in the state for those categories, especially on the 5A level here. So, that's a good place to start when talking about who's coming back. And then, like I said earlier, after talking about the leading receivers, there was a trio of Xavier Nito, Powers, and Vaughn, who were all sophomores, and they combined for 600 yards with Nito putting together 383 of those yards. So, they'll have a pretty solid junior core of receivers here on the offensive side of the ball. But going to kind of jump back and forth a little bit here. There was somebody who did step up last year who was a junior who led the team in tackles, and that was Preston Emkin, who reached 102 tackles as a junior and was able to record a ton of physical stops in the Centennial League. And one can hope that he's even better next season. And then we got another Wakalanji here. This is in Congolo, who, didn't have as good of a season as he was probably hoping for his junior year, but still produced, 62 tackles, 2 for loss. And, I think from what I was looking at on the roster, this might be the last Wakalanji here at Grandview. And so, he has that going for him as far as a little bit of a legacy thing here for the Wakalanjis and, kind of their historic run as contributors at Grandview. So, and then also on the defensive side of the ball, you have MJ Hayes, who, is going to be a rising junior this season. And as a sophomore, he was second on the team with 6 pass deflections and also had 33 tackles. And, he was put on an island somewhat consistently. And if he could bring down some of these deflections, he could be in for around a 4 interception season, honestly. He plays opposing receivers very tight. And, if you're going to test him, he'll, he was tested multiple times, is what I should say, and he rose to the occasion a handful of times as well. And then Oba Zaraki here was the only other defender to record interceptions. I'm unsure of his position heading forward since he didn't get a ton of starts last season, but either way, he should be in the defensive secondary and, looking to contribute, obviously, for this team here. And then the big returner here, the one who, kind of will decide how far this team goes, who threw it or handed it off to other athletes or kept it himself, was Liam Zarka. He had a total of 30 touchdowns, and he was the co-winner of Offensive Player of the Year in the Centennial League. He's an all-state guy, and, he's hungry to win after having been so close the past 2 years of starting. Not only did he have all those scores last season, but 2,400 yards from scrimmage with his passing and rushing, just going ballistic, So his health and his progression with his young receivers are critical to Grandview's ability to make a deep run this season. So, talked about their schedule a little bit last year, projected their window of wins to be 6 to 8. They obviously were on the higher end of that here. And, I think that they're going to be a force to be reckoned with once again this year. And then we'll see what happens in the playoffs, where they have had their struggles the past couple of seasons. So, they start off at home against Overland. That's a win. They start off at home against Fossil Ridge. That should be a win. They play Ralston Valley on the road. That one's a toss-up. But, like I said, that one's a toss-up. So that could go either way. So that's where the window of wins comes in, I should say. And then, they have Fruita Monument at home. Fruita Monument graduating a ton of playmakers. They should be able to win this one without double overtime. They're going to destroy Pomona. I think they're going to take care of business against Eaglecrest. They should beat Arapahoe, I would think. They should beat Smoky Hill and Cherokee Trail. And then Cherry Creek is the question mark here. So, I'd say at worst, they maybe lose 3 games. But at best, they only lose to Creek or only lose to Ralston Valley. So I'm going to say 7-9, that is, for their window of wins here. And I'm going to say official record of 8-2 again. I think that's very fair, just because I have a little bit more faith in Creek and Ralston Valley, but this could be the year that they win the league unequivocally and beat Creek and just go 5-0 and then go 9-1. So, and that's obviously why I have the high end of their window of wins at 9. And, this is a team that still could go undefeated as well, but I feel pretty comfortable with that 7-9 window of wins for the Wolves here. Now, on the opposite side of the spectrum here in the Centennial League is Smoky Hill. I was very, very wrong about them last year. I thought that they could maybe win 4 to 6 games and sneak into the playoffs, but that did not happen as they struggled mightily last year, going 1-8 8-9, and they were kind of just in the storm cellar of 5A football. I mean, they had to forfeit their first game of the season against Denver East. They lose a close one to Rock Canyon. They destroy Overland. So this is starting to, this looks like a team that I was kind of thinking they were going to go the direction that I thought they were going. They lose a big one to Palmer Ridge. That's kind of expected. But then they lose to Highlands Ranch. Wasn't really expecting them to lose that one. I think that that's one that they would want back. And then, they lose to a Cherokee Trail. And, they go 0-5 in the league. And I think that they should have been able to push a little bit more. If they were able to play that Denver East game, who knows, obviously, but I think that that is where the wins that I was looking for should have been coming from for them to go 4-6 last year instead of 1-9, and getting scored on almost at will. So let's talk about some of the graduating seniors. Tyleek Bowers was the starter, but he performed better over the ground with over 1,000 yards and 19 combined touchdowns, 11 of those through the ground. And, that was good enough to win Athlete of the Year from other coaches in the Centennial League, but just didn't quite make the strides as a passer that I was kind of hoping for when I was previewing this Bison team. Now, two of his top pass catchers in Jamal Humphrey and Troy L. Dixon Jr., who had 5 and 2 receiving scores respectively last season and over 900 combined receiving yards. Those are both going to be guys who are graduating as well. So whoever's next under center will, be playing with guys probably in their grade. And then 8 out of the 10 leading tacklers are graduating, and the 2 that aren't combined for only 8 tackles compared to 71 from Taylor, 69 from Thompson, 59 from Copeland. And, those make up the top 3, with those 3 also combining for 15 tackles for loss. And this doesn't even account for Isaac Withers, who led the team with 9 tackles for loss and tied with Caleb Grimble with 3 sacks to lead the Bison. Caleb Grimble was also an all-league offensive lineman and a second-team all-state player who's graduating. Amir Copeland was another defensive lineman who had earned first-team defense in league. And then you have Roscoe Taylor, who, not only led the team in tackles, but also led the team in interceptions, along with Kyron Gales, who both had 3 interceptions. Out of the 9 recorded interceptions, only 1 was made by a non-senior. So this defense is taking a pretty heavy hit here, and then the offense losing their quarterback and whatnot, as well as, an offensive lineman and some skill position guys. There's going to be plenty of opportunities for these underclassmen here. So let's talk about some guys who contributed last year. You have Josiah Hargrove, who did a little bit of everything on defense, 53 tackles, 6 tackles for loss, and that interception that I was talking about. So he'll be rising into his senior year this fall. And then, on the offensive side of the ball, one of the rushers who's going to be coming back is going to be Kai Washington. He had 79 carries for 400 yards and 3 touchdowns, and another 2 receiving touchdowns, so 5 total touchdowns for Kai there. And then John Bass Jr. had over 300 yards catching and rushing and had 4 rushing scores. So, might have to lean on those 2 guys out of the backfield with a little bit of a dual, or a running back by committee threat. And then one would probably have to assume that the class of 2025 product Break is up next, having attempted 38 passes last season. With such a small sample size, it's hard to say if he's the starter or the answer for Smoky Hill. And, I'd say after a couple of years of relevance, Smoky Hill is kind of scaling back to the type of program we have come to know, as with the extreme mediocrity that, was happening over there when I was in school and whatnot. And the mass exodus on the defensive side of the ball is going to mean that they're going to struggle this year. I really do think that they're going to struggle this year, probably even more so than last year, if I'm being 100% honest. And so, looking at their schedule, I would hope that they're able to, beat Overland, but I'm not entirely positive about Denver East. Maybe with graduates at Highlands Ranch, they could sneak that one in, but I think that everyone else in league kind of took not necessarily a step forward, but it's just going to be more competitive this year. I think that one of the only teams that they might be able to beat in league is maybe Cherokee Trail or maybe Eaglecrest, but I don't see them toppling Arapahoe, Cherry Creek, or Grandview, honestly. And then, Palmer Ridge, they're going to have a new coach, but they have a lot of returning talent as well. They're a great program. So, they probably lose that game. And I'm going to give them a window of wins of 1-3 here, hoping that they are able to sneak one of those wins in, whether, it's over East, Highlands Ranch, or Overland, probably, with those being the opportunities to win for this, Buffalo's team here. So that's, I know that's brief and short, but that's kind of all that there is to talk about here about the Smoky Hill squad. Now, as for the Centennial League and as it goes, we did have a resurgence last year from the Eaglecrest Raptor program. They got their coach back, and, like I said, they were back to being relevant and, to their winning ways with plenty of returners. And, they had a playoff berth and one of the most explosive offenses in the state. They weren't really able to hang with the physicality in the Centennial League, but their speed and versatility was enough to overwhelm their non-league opponents. They went 5-0 with Mike Schmidt listed on the roster, and I would expect a similar level of offense with a different cast of characters that is maybe just a hair peeled back. Last season they opened up with 56 points against Brighton, 34 points against Horizon. They squeak by a Highlands Ranch team that kind of had an overachieving defense last year, in my opinion, 18-15. Then they take care of business against Rocky Mountain and Lakewood before getting into league, where they do win 2 games to go 2-3 before getting kind of rocked in the opening round of the playoffs against a very well-tested Fountain Fort Carson team. So, let's talk about some things that are going to be kind of difficult for Eaglecrest here. And I think that the main one is there's no replacing an athlete as special as Diego Kearns. He had over 2,000 all-purpose yards last season, including 1,548 rushing yards on a gaudy 7 yards per carry and 17 total touchdowns. His speed, acceleration, and agility was legendary for his career at Eaglecrest, and they will not only miss him, but so will Colorado football. Well, not his opponents, but you know what I mean. Not only that, but anyone who had significant touches as well in the backfield is also graduating. But I mean, Kearns, who is just the guy who made plays. He was able to return kicks, punts. He was, dangerous out of the backfield, catching the football as well. He could take screens to the house and, was somebody who obviously was a top 5 senior running back here for us here at the pod when assessing tailbacks this past season. So, that's going to be hard to replace. Jacob Schmidt was not the best quarterback ever, but he was still the leading passer last season with 60% completion, and he threw more touchdowns than interceptions at a 15-10 ratio. Tyson Clark, he led the team with 26 receptions and is graduating. And then flipping over to the defensive side of the ball, you have Mueller. He was second on the team in tackles with 81, and will take those across the stage with him, along with 5 of the other top tacklers. Most notably Stagner, who had 54 total tackles, and 3 of those going for loss. And then Peyton Taylor, he was in serious consideration as being one of the best defensive backs in the senior class, with the team leading 8 pass deflections, 3 interceptions, and a pretty mind-bogglingly large amount of interception return yards with over 100. Not to mention a kickoff return and 2 punt returns for touchdowns, being second on the squad in total touchdowns. He was a big play threat anytime he got his hands on the ball, and he was able to go get the ball as well on the defensive side of the ball. So, they are missing, in the most literal sense, playmakers on this team heading into next season. And if I'm being completely honest, this is a pretty, this was a pretty young team last year, even though they have some very high-end or top-end talent that is graduating. There's plenty of talent that is returning, including leading pass defender, safety, Cam Worm Chapa. I believe he has an offer to UNC. He led the team in interceptions with 6. He also had 4 pass deflections, which was second best after Peyton Taylor. And, he also led the team in tackles at 100, and he did a better job of getting to the ball sooner, but was just taking great angles to stop touchdowns constantly throughout the season and preventing the really big plays. Now, also, somebody who I do know has an offer to Northern Colorado is Corey Jackson. He enters his senior season in the defensive secondary with a quieter season on 3 pass deflections and 31 total tackles. But is a part of a Raptor secondary that has had so many years to mesh and is very talented himself, and is a watch list guy for sure as far as cornerbacks go. So, and then this was a bit of a newer one. I didn't have a chance to enter this into my notes until right now, but they were able to. I don't know if he's going to be eligible with transferring or whatnot, but Joel Yaboa from Thomas Jefferson, who was either the leader or second in pass deflections for that TJ squad, he is now said to be at Eaglecrest. And so, that's a great, addition for them, and, someone that's going to be able to kind of help with, the pass game and whatnot, especially as some of these teams are going to be passing the ball quite a bit. I look at Cherokee Trail, who's going to be passing the ball a lot in this league. Grandview is a team that's going to be able to pass the ball very well. So it doesn't hurt to be able to match up. Horizon is a team that can pass the ball well as far as out of league. So, it's good to have a very solid secondary, which is something that I think Eaglecrest is known for, but, especially will, be able to back up this year. Now, there's a sophomore kind of linebacker slash nickel defender in Ramaje Owens, who had 65 tackles, and he takes solid read steps and he flies downfield very well upon realization of plays, and he also had 2 interceptions in the pass game. And then the leading receiver in yards, Xavier Waldron, returns after 257 yards and 4 scores. And this is further aided by a pair of 2025 guys in Burke Whittycombe and Xavion Gamble, who are sophomores that had 4 and 2 receiving touchdowns respectively and combined for over 320 yards, meaning whoever's under center next year has some guys to throw to who have varsity experience at least. Brandon Raplogle was second-team all-defense in the Centennial League and will be heading into his junior year. And then on the offensive line, they will see Weatherby Jr. ascend into his senior year, and Kale will have to be making improvements as a pass blocker if this offense is to be more balanced, with question marks at their 2 most important positions last year as far as quarterback and running back goes. So, while they do have a lot of returners, I think that the positions that they have question marks at are very big deals. Now, I do think that they are going to have athletes for that tailback position, or just have one of their better athletes maybe play both ways. And then quarterback, the quarterback isn't asked to do a whole lot in this offense, if I'm being 1,000%. And, I think that overall it's going to be hard to have some of the decision making that Jacob Schmidt had. And so, I think that they should beat Brighton here. Brighton's just a team that's very young. And I think that Eaglecrest should just be stronger up front. Horizon, this is a game that they should probably win, since we don't really know what Horizon's defense, running game, or head coach is going to look like. But you always have to be careful against a guy like Alex Birch. Highlands Ranch, I think that they should win this game a little bit easier this season with everyone who graduated last season. Rocky Mountain is a team that graduated a lot of talent, so they should be able to win this game, and they should be able to beat Lakewood as well. So, you're looking at a potential 5-0 or at worst 4-1 start in their non-league games. And then, heading into league, I don't think that they could beat Grandview. Cherokee Trail is going to be a toss-up. Cherry Creek, they probably won't be able to beat. Smoky Hill, they should be able to beat, and Arapahoe, they should be able to beat. So I'd say either 1-4 or 2-3 in league here to close out their season. So that gives them a window of wins of 6 to 8, I would say, potentially, or it's more like 6 to 7 if I'm being completely honest. So I'm gonna say, but on the low end of things, it could be 5. So we'll say a window of wins of 5 to 7 for this Raptor squad, who could go undefeated in non-league games and then maybe go winless in league, but they should beat Smoky Hill, and I'm going to say that they go 6-4 on this season here. And now the team that, we're always talking about here because they win, and that's going to be the Cherry Creek Bruins, your three-peat state champs, the defending state champs heading into this season, who, per usual, were very dominant last year. Let's go ahead and talk about their recap. And it's funny that they won state again. I was able to keep that sentence from last year, but I would argue that this season was even more of a roller coaster with the quarterback carousel, kind of exchanging seats throughout the season that culminated in a swap at halftime to beat Valor in the state championship game. And while they have a handful of returners, they will be graduating a lot of significant members on one of the best defenses in Colorado football history that they have been able to roll out for the past 4 years. They're not going to go away, and I think that they're still a threat to win state, and I'll go over some reasons why. But, I mean, you look at the schedule last year, and they just do such a great job of testing themselves. They beat Ralston Valley out of the gate, and Coach Logan had nothing but praise for that team, and Yanacito as well. So, they're looking forward to that rematch. They lose to St. Edwards, St. Edward, I should say, who's one of the best teams in Ohio. I think that they end up winning state out there. They lose to them 13-9 in Ohio. So I think that that's obviously a good way to test yourself. They beat Chatfield by multiple scores. They beat Arvada West by multiple scores. They absolutely trounce Regis Jesuit. So they start off 4-1 non-league. And then in league, they destroy Cherokee Trail, Smoky Hill, Eaglecrest, and Arapahoe before getting upset by Grandview right before the playoffs. Very similar to last year where they, lose to Arapahoe and they it serves as a wake-up call, and then they just truly dominate in the postseason, scoring at least 41 points in their 3 playoff games after a bye, beating Fountain Fort Carson, Thunder Ridge, and Pine Creek, and then having a comeback win over Valor Christian in what's been the most entertaining 5A game that we've covered since starting this podcast. So, let's go ahead and talk about the graduating seniors because there is a lot of them. But the big highlight here is the number 1 recruit from Colorado, Blake Purchase, who's heading to the Pacific Northwest as a Duck. And, his grading as one of the best prospects we have ever had the pleasure of watching checks out. And it's a huge loss for this defense in both the pass game with his ability to, deflect passes, but even more in the pass rushing department with a team-high 18 sacks. Not to mention, his ability to play the run was very good. He's somebody who could drop back in coverage. He could bat passes with a very good vertical and height and size and frame. And, he was the Chassa Player of the Year. He was the Gatorade Player of the Year. Those are big shoes to fill no matter what program you are. So that's the type of caliber of player that's being replaced here. High-level D1 guy. Same with Logan Brantley, who's just another dude for this Bruin defense, playing on the FBS level here with his commitment to KU as a linebacker after being a hybrid defensive athlete who could rush, play man, zone, and play the run incredibly well. His grading as the best, quote, safety prospect reflects on his versatility as one of the best in the state last season and the interception leader for this squad since, he played in the nickel role. He would roll back, cover 2, cover 3, man up, play linebacker, man up against tight ends or slot receivers. He's just one of the best athletes that we've probably ever seen as well, and just a freak as far as, being able to close distances very fast, very good reaction time, and a very smart football player as well. Also in this secondary was all these guys were top 5 seniors at their position, by the way, if not number 1. Blake Purchase was, as was, Logan here. And, Braylon Warren, while he wasn't number 1, he was a top 5 corner. He was a lockdown guy who made our senior list, and they'll miss him being able to just kind of fly solo on his side of the field. Marte Russell is somebody who stepped up as a teammate and moved to outside backer and contributed with solid pass coverage these past couple of seasons. Javion Smith-Combs signed to CSU, and, he takes with him a 6'6", 240-pound frame to Fort Collins after racking up 3 sacks and 38 tackles last year. Chase Brackney, he was our number 2 rated defensive end in the class of 2023, and, he might be moving to the interior defensive line with his incredible size and strength, but regardless, racked up 7 tackles for loss and, got a scholarship to Iowa. I think that matches his play style very, very well. So, yeah, that's just a ton of top 5 guys from our senior list, a ton of all playmaker guys, and, just absolute beasts on all 3 levels of the defense. And then for the offensive side of the ball, maybe not the largest contributions to the overall season, but the guy who stepped up the biggest when he needed to was senior quarterback Brian Rudden, who came in the second half of that state game and connected with fellow senior receiver Ishmael Cece for a score and some solid chain-moving plays to bring Creek another championship. He was efficient in his time, but most of all, he was poised, and that will be something that the quarterbacks competing for the starting spot will have to prove this year. And they'll have to prove it without PMC's number 1 rated senior wide receiver of the 2023 class, Ishmael Cece, who battled through injuries to still produce 886 yards on 46 receptions and 13 scores via a combination of field awareness, route running, and great body control that landed him at Stanford. Then the second leading receiver, Kyer Johnson, was a speedy slot who racked up 444 yards and 5 scores while also being a threat on special teams. But a big loss here will be the leading rusher for the team, Carlson Bubba Tan, who had 1,224 yards and found pay dirt 13 times and was the crutch for this offense that didn't really have an identity through the air for the majority of the season. And, he was one half of a dynamite tandem. And then paving the way for a solid running game was interior offensive lineman Hank Zelinskis, who was a top 5 senior at interior offensive line. And, his consistent footwork and strength, pulling constantly from the center position, helped identify defenses and looks while set and paved the way for a very dynamic run game last season. But, it's not all gloom and doom here, Creek fans. Don't worry. And for the rest of the state that thinks it's going to be easy, don't get your hopes up either in that regard, because the Bruins still have plenty of talent, especially on the offensive line, where they're going to be returning, three-star trio of, Max Parrott, 6'4", 275 pounds, and USC commit Hayden Treader, 6'6", 300 pounds, and Iowa State commit AJ Burton, 6'5", 275 pounds. And I think that Max Parrott might have just committed as well. I think I saw something about that on Twitter. So, I'll go ahead and take a look into that. But either way, these guys helped pave the way for an offense that had so many yards from scrimmage running the football. They had multiple playmakers running the football very well. And all in all, that's a lot of size and experience to be returning who are all juniors. And now they're even taking a step further, and they're doing the most there. So, and that's what it was. Max Parrott committed to Purdue recently, so that is the breaking news on that front there. So, yeah, you'll have those guys returning, and then you'll have 2 running backs who had carries last year in Jordan Herron and freshman from last year, so rising sophomore tailback Jaden Fox, who Blake Purchase told us to keep an eye out for. Those guys combined for over 1,000 yards and 14 scores, 13 touchdowns from Jordan Herron specifically. So, those guys will keep this offense balanced for whoever wins the quarterback battle. And the 2 guys who I think are going to be competing for it are Aurelio Marchiol and Brady Vodka. Obviously, Brady was the leading passer from last year, but, he finished the regular season until he got pulled from the championship, so we'll see who is confident heading into the fall. But I imagine Brady probably starts, since in the regular season he did post 13 touchdowns to only 1 interception, and his ability to run the ball and use his size was, a different dynamic for this Creek offense from, years past. So, and I trust Dave Logan and the coaching staff to develop him and be able to deliver darts from the pocket as well. Now, T.I. is somebody who returns on the defensive side of the ball after a freshman season that saw him collect 3 sacks, 23 tackles, a tackle for loss, and a few offers over the summer, from the likes of CU and I believe Iowa State maybe, entering only his sophomore season. Then, the headlining defender in this is class of 2024 do-it-all linebacker Angelo Petrides, who had himself another 100-plus tackle season and had another pair of interceptions, proving himself as capable in both the run and pass game. And he will be the star of this defense heading into his senior year. He's a very well-rounded linebacker and somebody who I think is probably my projection for the best linebacker in the class of 2024 when we do those senior rankings. Then the second leading tackler, Jake Howell, he returns after a 113 tackle season where he ended up in the backfield 4 times. And, between Howell and Petridis, this is going to be a very tough team to run on. But, these two guys are going to have a little bit more on their plates with a defensive line that was capable of doing so much and had so much depth, going to be looking a lot different this season. Aiden Napke is only a junior at the safety position, but has been a ball hawk through his first 2 years and stepped up as a tackler this season, improving his tackle numbers up to 78, and is somebody who's recorded multiple interceptions and pass deflections every year, and is somebody that, can play the whole football field for this Bruins team. Then Keegan Perea on the D-line hopes to pick up where I assume his older brother Caleb Perea left off after a season that saw him notch 3 sacks in just 7 games played. And then there are 3 other juniors who notched interceptions this season. Now, while this Creek team, talking about window of wins, the wow here to wrap up this episode, while this Creek team is not the same as last year, no one said they were going to be, but they just won't be. They still have plenty of experience returning on the offensive side of the ball to hopefully offset some of the growing pains on defense. But in addition to that, they still have the benefit of the best coach in Colorado football history with Dave Logan, and I cannot see them losing more than 3 games. I'm going to say a window of wins of 7 to 9 here. Now, they open up the season at home against Ralston Valley. That could be a loss. They also have another home game against Legacy, but they have the benefit of both of those being home games. At worst, they split those going 1-1 before their other non-league games of Chatfield, Arvada West, and Regis Jesuit. I think that they probably get a clean sweep of those, with maybe Chatfield posing the biggest threat there, just with the amount of returners that they have. But I think that they just outclass them up front in size, strength, and technique on the offensive line. So, probably 4-1 at worst heading into league play, where they take care of Cherokee Trail, they take care of Smoky Hill, they take care of Eaglecrest, and then they end the season at home against Arapahoe and on the road against Grandview. And, once again, I think that at worst, they maybe go 4-1 in those. So 8-2, I think, at worst, but probably a regular season record of 9-1 for the Cherry Creek Bruins. But 8-2 seems to be the kind of pattern here. So let's just roll with what they've done the past 2 years and call it 8-2 this season for the Cherry Creek Bruins. And sorry, haters, but another chance to run it back and go to state. So, but that will conclude my season previews of, these teams on this episode with the Boulder Panthers, Mountain Range Mustangs, Northglenn Norsemen, Westminster Wolves, and then the Centennial League here with the Arapahoe Warriors, Cherokee Trail Cougars, Grandview Wolves, Smoky Hill Buffaloes, Eaglecrest Raptors, and the defending state champion, Cherry Creek Bruins. Be sure to follow us on Tik Tok, as we are going to have little snippet previews on there as well with overall synopsises of these squads here. And then please stay tuned, as I have 2 more season previews coming out this week and 3 a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday for the next few weeks. And then after I depart, Coach V and Gideon will be doing much of the same. So to keep up with all of those episodes, be sure to like, subscribe, follow us on YouTube or Spotify podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and turn on your notifications so you get notified whenever the newest episode comes out. This, in addition to following us on social media via Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, will be a great way to keep track of all of our newest episodes, and be sure to see what we think of your team and your program once it comes time for them. If you have any clarifications, please be sure to reach out to us over DMs if somebody has transferred or anything like that, because we only know so much with our little network that we have here, our little web of information, of reliable information, that is. So thank you all for tuning in to this episode. I have been your host, Kodey Stauffer, and peace.